Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 5th of September 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your hosts, Mike Robinson, and myself, Brian Gerrish. The sequel.
Novichok 2, the sequel continues. Well, we got the first clue from Reuters this morning because they had an article. The headline was British PM May to make emergency statement to Parliament. Of course, we knew we had received the press release from the Organisation on Prohibition of Chemical Weapons last night, so we knew what this was about. Theresa May's giving her speech, her presentation, her briefing now as we speak. We heard a few minutes of it before we came on air, Brian, and well, it went along the lines of yada, 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 not really much else in it. Except that, Brian, they seem to be giving some pretty specific information about two suspects who have now been charged. We'll come on to that in a second. Who apparently they, after pouring through, with 250 police officers pouring through thousands of hours of CCTV, they had managed to track from a flight from Russia to Salisbury on the train, and within a few feet of the Skripal's house, apparently, within a few minutes of the attack, apparently. But apparently they also did a bit of a recce just the day before.
Yeah, quite extraordinary. You get off a plane, you check into a hotel, and then you pop down to Salisbury for a quick look, and then pop back again to the hotel. So very, very quick reconnaissance for what was going to be an immensely dangerous, apparently, event. I found that narrative a bit strange, but the Prime Minister was clearly very taken with it.
She didn't mention whether they were carrying baby wipes at the time, but anyway, because Theresa May is giving her statement at this moment, obviously we can't show it to you. So instead, let's show you the statement from the Crown Prosecution Service this morning about the two suspects.
The Counter-Terrorism Policing Network has conducted a thorough investigation into how this attack happened. They have recently submitted a file of evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service so that we could make a decision whether criminal charges could be brought against anyone who is involved in these events. Prosecutors from the CPS Counter-Terrorism Division have considered the evidence and have concluded that there is sufficient evidence to provide a realistic prospect of conviction, and that it is clearly in the public interest to charge Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Basharov, who are Russian nationals, with the following offences: conspiracy to murder Sergei Skripal, attempted murder of Sergei Skripal, Yulia Skripal and Nick Bailey, use and possession of Novichok contrary to the Chemical Weapons Act, and causing grievous bodily harm with intent to Yulia Skripal and Nick Bailey. We will not be applying to Russia for the extradition of these males, as the Russian constitution does not permit extradition of its own nationals. We have, however, obtained a European arrest warrant, which means that if either man travels to a country where the EAW is valid, they will be arrested and face extradition on these charges, for which there is no statute of limitations.
So here are the two, Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Basharov, not the real names. Theresa May confirmed that those weren't the real names, or at least they believe that those were aliases that they were travelling on, but there they are, the two swarthy looking gents who apparently came over and poisoned 4 people. But anyway, she was saying that they are not going to attempt to initiate extradition proceedings in Russia because, of course, Russia doesn't extradite Russian nationals to foreign countries. But they have issued a European arrest warrant.
And I found that very interesting. This has just come out at the time that we had Amber Rudd in the House this morning saying that it was vital that whatever happened with Brexit, we didn't drop the joint security arrangements with the European Union. So here's a classic example of why we need those arrangements, European arrest warrant.
Absolutely. Well, the CPS made their statement that you've just heard. Also making a statement this morning was Neil Basu, the Assistant Commissioner of Specialist Ops and Metropolitan Police, saying today marks the most significant moment so far in what has been one of the most complex and intensive investigations we've undertaken in counter-terrorism policing. The charging of 2 suspects, both Russian nationals, in relation to the attack on Sergei and Yulia Skripal. It would be I would like to thank the Crown Prosecution Service for their independent assessment of the evidence in the case. Today's announcement by the CPS marks the most significant development in the investigation. We now have sufficient evidence to bring charges in relation to the attack on Sergei and Yulia Skripal in Salisbury, and domestic and European arrest warrants have been issued for the two suspects. We're also seeking to circulate Interpol red notices. And they said we've now linked the attack on the Skripals and the events in Amesbury, which affected Don Sturgis and Charlie Rowley. It now forms one investigation. Our rationale for linking the two investigations is primarily based on the following four facts. Firstly, our own analysis and the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in The Hague has confirmed that the same type of Novichok was used in both cases. Well, was it? We'll come on to that in a second. Secondly, the nerve agent is one of the rarest chemical warfare agents in the world, and its discovery twice in such close proximity is beyond a coincidence. Third, the manner in which the bottle and packaging has been adapted makes it perfect cover for smuggling the weapon into the country, and a perfect delivery method for the attack against the Skripal's front door. Fourth, the lack of crossover between the known movements of the suspects and Don and Charlie's known movements around Salisbury, and the fact that there is no evidence to suggest they've been targeted, mean it's much more likely Don and Charlie found the item. So the BBC, of course, had something to say about this morning. Experts confirmed the substance was Novichok. They said the substance that killed a woman in Amesbury was the same Novichok nerve agent that poisoned Sergei and Yulia Skripal. Experts have confirmed. Did they confirm that? Well, let's have a look at the OPCW statement. They said that their team was able to collect the blood samples from Mr. Charles Rowley for transport to OPCW laboratory and subsequent analysis. Mr. Rowley was able to give informed consent himself for that. The team attended and observed the post-mortem of Ms. Dawn Sturgis. They were able to collect a number of biomedical samples, mainly tissue samples for transport, and that the consent for that was obtained from her family and complied with the UK Human Tissue Act. They went on to say the team was briefed on the identity of the toxic chemical identified by the United Kingdom and was able to review analytical results and data from the chemical analysis of biomedical samples collected from the affected individuals by the British authorities. So they didn't collect them. They were collected by the British authorities and they analysed them. It goes on to say the results of the analysis shows that the sample consists of the toxic chemical at a concentration of 97 to 98%. The sample is therefore considered a neat agent of high purity. The OPCW also identified a number of impurities constituting the remaining 2 to 3% of the sample. They said that the results of the analysis conducted by OPCW confirmed the findings of the United Kingdom relating to the identity of the toxic chemical that intoxicated Mr. Charles Rowley and Ms. Dawn Sturgis. The toxic chemical compound which displays the toxic properties of a nerve agent is the same toxic chemical that was found in the biomedical and environmental samples relating to the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal and Mr. Nicholas Bailey on 4th of March 2018 in Salisbury. So they're saying they confirm the findings of the UK regarding the identity, but they don't define which findings those are. Those are the findings of Portendown themselves and any statement that Portendown has made, or are those the public statements made by the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary at the time, or any other government agency? That's not clear. And then they go on to say, finally, the name and structure of the identified toxic chemical are contained in the full classified report of the Secretariat available to all states parties. Now, that's been made available to states parties on request of the UK. But the point is here that the OPCW will not name this toxic chemical publicly. And I find this very strange, Brian. They say that in certain language that it's the same as the toxic chemical that the UK has identified, but they will not state themselves what that is in public. And I don't really understand why that would be.
Well, to me, a guess would be because they're not fully confident to do that. They don't want to commit themselves and then have the ground pulled out from under them later on.
I mean, do you think it's possible that there's been a private briefing as to what this toxic chemical is, and public statements from the UK government, and these are two different things, and therefore they don't want to make a public statement of their own?
Anything's possible in this, Mike, because nothing in this story stacks up. I mean, even the sample they're talking about, it's not clear whether they're saying we were provided with a sample and that sample had contamination in it, 2 to 3%, or they're saying that the actual toxic substance itself was only 97, 98% pure. If that was the case, I would ask the question, is this not a very low purity for supposedly weapons grade nerve agent? So every angle we come in on this case, it does not stack up. There is something wrong. If they've got the evidence, surely they would be making the evidence fully public so that the general public will be under no misunderstanding as to what the agent was and the proof that this was a Russian chemical agent that could only have come from Russia. We're not getting that evidence. It's being buried. Well, it's being hidden.
Could only have come from the Russian state. Of course,
there
are other Russian actors that potentially could be involved in this. But anyway, Jeremy Hunt had this to say: the recklessness of the Russian state in bringing a nerve agent into the UK. He has no evidence that the Russian state brought a nerve agent into the UK. We've now got two names, which are supposedly aliases. They've not said that these two men are employees of the Russian state. They're not saying at this point that these two men are friends of Vladimir Putin. They're not saying that they're GRU operatives. They're just Russians. So are they friends of Boris Berezovsky, for example? I'm not saying that they are by any means, but there are lots of questions here. There are lots of people, lots of various factions within the Russian state, or within the Russian nation rather, that in fact are working in opposition to the Russian state and Vladimir Putin. So there are lots of questions here, aside from the source of the alleged chemical itself. So he's saying the recklessness of the Russian state in bringing a nerve agent into the UK and total disregard for the safety of the public is appalling and irresponsible. I think it's appalling and irresponsible to bandy accusations against people without evidence, and that seems to be what's going on here. And of course with the full complicity of the press, because here's AFP with their useful infographic telling us all about Novichok and how dangerous it is. Just another example here, The Independent, what a Novichok attack on Heathrow Airport would look like. And they go through with alleged expert statements on what would happen if Novichok was released in Heathrow Airport. And Heathrow Airport, a very likely target, Brian, because it's a hub and it's an icon.
What does this article achieve? We could have an independent article. What would a nuclear attack on Heathrow Airport look like?
Yes.
And what is the purpose of this article? It's hype. It's trying to raise the profile. It's trying to scare people. And is there a reason that this is all happening at this particular time? I think we may have some comment on that.
Yes, well, indeed we do. But before we get there, just going to ask it again. Where are the Skripals? Of course, we don't know. They are not being given any opportunity to speak. They're in, what do we say? Protective custody? Is that how we describe it? Or are they simply, are they kidnapped at this point?
Well, we don't know. We go round in circles because there's no good facts being put on the table, and every reasonable question we don't get answers to. So is this somebody has died? I think we have to accept that. Toxic agent was used, but the rest of it is theatre and pantomime. And of course, the wet wipes. We must not forget this. On one hand, we're saying this was an immensely dangerous attack. The Russian state carried it out, no evidence, but not to worry because the UK can deal with chemical grade nerve agents by using baby wipes and encouraging the public to use baby wipes to clean off nerve agents. This is clearly ridiculous. And there's got to be a reason that the British state is trying to fabricate this part of the story.
Okay, so the question then is why now? And of course, Where do we go? Syria, naturally, Idlib. This has been ramping up for quite some time. The extreme concern by the British government and the United States government that the Syrian army and the Russians are dealing with what's many consider to be, everyone with any sense considers to be terrorists in Idlib. Well, the activity began today, targeting terrorist positions in Hish, so that's been going on. It's going to go on for quite some time until the Idlib region of Syria is cleared out of terrorists. Well, of course, these are the terrorists which we funded and financed, and it's very unfortunate that that's taxpayers' money down the drain, perhaps, Brian?
Possibly. Let's bring in Lavrov, because he has been coming out with some particularly good questions. This is part of a report from Russia Today. The de-escalation zone in Idlib remains the only one where tens of thousands of extremists are concentrated, spearheaded by Jabhat al-Nusra. He told Russia's Channel 1, our partners, including America, keep reassuring us that they would ensure the separation of the so-called moderate opposition from the terrorists. And he goes on to, sorry, have we changed that?
Yeah.
Yes, we don't want the repetition of the failures, including by the Obama administration, which had sworn and signed under its obligation to separate moderates from terrorists, but failed to do so. Now we're witnessing the same subtle desire, if I understand the situation correctly, to get al-Nusra off the hook.
Absolutely.
So what we've got here is the Russians looking at the situation and saying it's just remarkable that we've got terrorists operating in Syria. They're now cornered in one area. These are immensely dangerous and brutal people, but we've got the West hesitating and doing everything they can to protect what? Their own terrorists. Well, we'd like to remind people that for several years we've been asking key questions about the relationship between the British government and terrorist organisations. And we come back to our report on the 14th of October 2014, where we were highlighting once again the fact that we had a former, well, then Conservative MP, Brooks Newmark, boasting the 19th of August 2013 that he'd met General Idris, the leader of the Syria Free Army, on the Syrian border. I told him hopefully airstrikes and missiles will soon be raining down on Assad's military infrastructure. And then there was this added, there are about 150,000 Free Syria Army fighters and 7,500 Jabhat al-Nusra fighters, which have links with Al-Qaeda. So embedded in the article about Brooks Newmark having these discussions on the Syrian border, it was being freely admitted that the Free Syrian Army was directly connected with al-Nusra terrorists who were themselves directly linked to Al-Qaeda. And we had British intelligence warning about this. The most significant terrorist threat to UK and its interests overseas comes from Al-Qaeda senior leadership. But nobody wanted to answer the question about what Brooks Newmark was actually doing there. Was he there on official business? Was he doing this because he's very keen in tracking the interests of Israel? Nobody quite knew. My MP, Gary Streeter, when I asked him to find out what Brooks Newmark was doing, meeting people who were linked through ultimately to al-Nusra, of course, Mr. Streeter didn't want to get involved, didn't want to ask any of the questions. So we say it does look very interesting that at a time when we have al-Nusra fighters cornered in Idlib, the American and British governments are not that keen on seeing them liquidated by the Russians. And I just remind people that at the time, Brooks Newmark was there as Minister for Civil Society. Transparency and counter fraud was part of his actual remit. We don't seem to be getting much transparency over what was actually going on behind the scenes with the Conservative government and links through to highly dubious, possibly terrorist groups in Syria.
Right. Okay. So, right, we'll move on then. And, well, some staggering news. Brian, Mark Zuckerberg, of course, chief executive of Facebook, has been writing in the Washington Post yesterday. And apparently he is all about protecting democracy. Facebook is all about protecting democracy. This is Facebook's role in the world. And he says the headline on his op-ed was Mark Zuckerberg was protecting democracy as an arms race. Here's how Facebook can help. So this was yesterday evening. This was published, and today there are hearings going on in the Congress involving Facebook, Twitter, Google. Still not clear whether they're going to turn up for those. But he said that companies such as Facebook face sophisticated, well-funded adversaries who are getting smarter over time. It's an arms race, and it will take the combined forces of the US private and public sectors to protect America's democracy from outside influence. So here, once again, we have this model that we've been talking about for months, if not years, of well, it's effectively Theresa May's fusion doctrine. It's the merger between the public sector and the private sector working together to protect what they describe as democracy, but which we argue is nothing of the sort. And what he's effectively saying is here that Facebook will be working directly with government government agencies in order to shut down narratives that they don't like. Well, that's exactly what he goes on to talk about. He's talking about posts being flagged as potentially false, that they then get passed on to independent fact checkers, such as who might be an independent fact checker? Well, Associated Press, Weekly Standard. These are what they consider independent fact checkers to review. And Facebook will demote posts rated as false, which means they lose 80% of future traffic. And he went on to say, I'm often asked how confident I feel about the midterm elections. This is in the United States. He said, we've made lots of progress, as our work during the French, German, Mexican and Italian elections has shown. In each case, we identified and removed fake accounts and bad content leading up to the elections. And in Germany, we worked directly with the government to share information about potential threats. So what he's admitting here is that far from protecting democracy, he's interfering with election processes. He, of course, is pretending that what he's doing is removing fake accounts, which are there to interfere with election processes. But where is the freedom of speech here, particularly at election time?
Well, this is participatory democracy, Mike, isn't it? It's where the individual doesn't have a place in that democratic system at all, because all of the agencies, all of the NGOs, all of the charities are fully linked in with the government anyway in one blob. You could call it a communitarian blob, but basically this is a dictatorial state. This is a fascist state.
Well, let's move on to another aspect of this then, because I think yesterday or the day before, the Five Eyes published this statement of principles on access to evidence and encryption. And so they're warning technology companies that they will require what they're describing as lawful access to all encrypted emails, texts, voice communications, and that they will compel the compliance of the private companies. But what we've just heard from Mark Zuckerberg is that private companies will be working with public sector bodies to protect democracy. So clearly that's not going to be a problem. And so this is the United States, Britain, Australia, New Zealand and Canada. This is the Five Eyes intelligence community. So they're pretty upset about the level of encryption on various apps, on cell phones and on computers. And they said, should governments continue to encounter impediments to lawful access to information necessary to aid the protection of the citizens of our countries, we may pursue technological enforcement, legislative or other measures to achieve full lawful access solutions. I think we need to define the word lawful there, but anyway, that's what they're up to.
Lawful is whatever they deem to be lawful.
And in the meantime, yes, I think that's right. In the meantime, the fear factor over the rise of the far right continues to be pumped out by the mainstream media in the UK. And here we have the National Action, 5 people allegedly belonging to National Action being arrested, including a 17-year-old, mainly in the Midlands, it seems, but they've been arrested. And Sky News here promoting the idea that we have a rising far right that we've got to deal with?
Dangerous times, Mike. Well, we've got the police doing unbelievably good investigation to track down those Novichok people, but when it's children who are murdered and tortured in UK and elsewhere, the police seem to be unable to do much to help them. We just put up a reminder that there was a hearing for Melanie Shaw, child abuse whistleblower. That was Leeds Crown Court. We didn't have a time for it, so it may have taken place already this morning, or it may be up till 2 o'clock this afternoon. But essentially, this was fitness to plead. Now, UK column does not have a lot of detailed information on the situation with Melanie at the moment. We can say that we are desperately worried that having appeared in court, either having been drugged or suffering from the withdrawal of drugs in a previous hearing, that was the report from members of the public present. Melanie was not sent for a full medical checkup and a psychiatric check. She was simply sent back to prison by the judge. Many people are saying, are they now on the route to fully incarcerate Melanie in the psychiatric gulag of UK in order to keep her evidence about child abuse at Beechwood Children's Home in Nottingham and its links through to the powerhouse in Westminster and London is the objective, to take her out of the way completely. So we don't have more information on this hearing. We'll have to wait till the end of today, but the best we can do is to keep track of the court hearing and to make sure that the authorities know that a great many people in the British public are watching out for Melanie Shaw. I'd just like to add that we are, of course, aware that there are many other good people fighting the cause of child abuse, and we hope in the near future to report more on work being done by others in Nottingham. Mickey Summers, one of them, who have been continuing to lobby and press for proper response to the abuse of children. But we'll see what happens.
Well, another day, another sex scandal involving the Roman Catholic Church, this time in Florida. 2 priests caught engaging in sex act in car near Popular Beach in full view of public is the Mirror headline here. And we don't need to go into the details of that other than to say that what was the response from the church? They released a statement saying, we're informed this morning that Reverend Diego Berrio and and Reverend Edwin Geraldo Cortez, both Roman Catholic priests, one working in Chicago, were arrested in Miami on September the 3rd. The Archbishop of Chicago has removed them from ministry and withdrawn facilities to minister in the Archdiocese of Chicago effective immediately. The Archdiocese will appoint an administrator for the other priest as soon as possible. And so it goes on, but basically no particular condemnation of their actions as such. And well, that's pretty much the view of the Pope as well, because yesterday he was giving a homily and really worried about the sort of fractiousness within the church at the moment, and really telling everybody they just needed to say their piece and then shut up. They shouldn't be being disruptive within the church on this issue. And he said, with people lacking goodwill, with people who only seek scandal, who only seek division, who only seek destruction, even within the family, they should really respond with silence and prayer. That should be the response to this stuff.
You wouldn't want anything actually being done to resolve the situation.
No, so that's the position of the church on this, unfortunately.
Well, we'll say that's the position of the Catholic Church on that. Let's bring in the Church of England, and we were just fascinated to see Archbishop Welby starring here with the BBC. Welby, taxes must rise to tackle unjust economy. So there's a whole article about an interview with Welby, and of course an embedded video clip. But essentially he was there to help the launch of an IPPR economic paper. And we'll have a look at that in just a moment. These are some of the things he's quoted as saying is what it is clear is that tax should be a fundamental part of being a citizen. So the Church of England is going to look after everybody by making sure you pay your taxes.
Good stuff.
He's on board. We need taxes. And the wealthy, of course, he says, should be paying more taxes. But we need to be paying taxes. It doesn't matter who you are. He says that people with huge power should be regulated. This is in the context of people with global corporations. He said they've got huge power, so we need a regulator to regulate them. And I'm saying, yes, so that will give more power to even fewer people, because if you're part of the regulation team, you're actually in control of the organisation itself, particularly when we see the banks appointing bankers to that very regulation authority. So is this man up to his Christian business, or is he doing something else? If he hadn't been wearing the dog collar, Mike, he would have just simply been another government minister talking policy. Quite extraordinary. But he said this: we care about human dignity. Because we care about human dignity, we the church, have to do something. Except, of course, when it comes to child abuse, ritualistic abuse, where the church has consistently turned a blind eye. And of course, we've had Welby himself appearing at the child abuse inquiry, giving evidence as to why the church failed in its duties. And we pointed out at that time that, of course, a book for people to read is Trust No One by Teresa Cooper, where she's talking about the unbelievable, very, very unpleasant drugging and sexual abuse of girls at the Church of England's Kendal House. All of that was covered up, and Teresa herself and other ladies that came forward about that abuse were effectively put under enormous pressure by the church to keep quiet. So that's the same as the Catholic Church there. And the Church of England used its vast wealth power to run an expensive legal team to help silence some of these people. And we got a clue for this man from his presentation at the inquiry. This is the actual video clip where he spent minutes tapping a pencil, umming and ahhing. He said he'd learnt to be ashamed again of the church. You can't read the transcripts and not be moved. But nothing happens. He's not done anything at all. So we've got a lot of questions. He went on to say, nobody can say it's not my fault. I've heard about a problem, but oh well, it was somebody else's duty to report it. That's not an acceptable human response, let alone a leadership response. If you know a child is being abused, not to report it is simply wrong. And what has this man done? Absolutely nothing. But now he's lecturing the country on what the new economic model should be. It's quite extraordinary stuff. And this was his press team when they were questioned as to when Justin Welby would reply to questions over apparent hypocrisy, that he said no stone should be left unturned in dealing with child abuse. But when people have been writing into the church asking about specific cases, the church does nothing apart from say, run away and talk to the police. So utter hypocrisy. But this man is now lecturing the country on economic matters. He said this: I start with the dignity of the human being, which is what I learned from Jesus Christ, the dignity and value of each individual human being, whoever they are. He argued that he was non-political and that his was not an attack on any particular government or party, as the problems had long-term roots. So this is him with his economic advisor hat on, after hobnobbing with Christine Lagarde in those champagne parties and Mark Carnage, as you would call him.
Can I just clarify, did Jesus not do something about turning over tables of money lenders?
Well, this is absolutely true, but sorry, he didn't really seem to want to talk about that. So there wasn't any mention that we could see in the BBC report about turning over the tables of money lenders, and there wasn't any other significant Christian message. So he was simply saying, pay your taxes, and we need a new economic policy. By the way, don't bother me with child abuse because I'm not interested.
Yeah, good stuff.
It's incredible. But this is the document. So here we are, Prosperity and Justice, a plan for the new economy. I recommend that people get onto the IPPR website and have a look at this for themselves, have a look at the history of the organisation, because they were started with a view to helping deal with Brexit and the fact we were going to need new economic policy in order to cope with Brexit and global challenges. And here's part of the policy. This is the commission itself. Now, Archbishop Welby, as you would expect from a man of the church, is there on this new economic commission. They're independent. We'll come on to that in a tick. But this is what they say. The Commission's final report, Prosperity and Justice, a plan for the new economy, was published in September 2018. That's just come out. The report sets out the Commission's analysis of the profound and long-standing problems of the UK economy and argues for a new vision in which prosperity and justice are achieved together. It presents a wide-ranging and integrated 10-part plan for reform with over 70 recommendations in areas including industrial strategy, labour market, corporate governance reform, competition policy, macroeconomic policy, financial sector, wealth and ownership, taxation, environmental sustainability, and devolved economic policy. Do you think, Mike, that possibly they're going to devolve the economic policy to these very think tank groups that have produced this document in the first place?
Well, indeed. I do wonder how you can discuss industrial strategy when you have not much industry left. Maybe that is the strategy. Labour market, well, that's going to be decimated by automation and AI, isn't it? So not much to talk about there either. So really what's left? Corporate governance, financial sector, City of London, that's really it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we did have a short phone call to the organisation this morning. Spoke to a very pleasant, very nice lady. Was a senior economist. Just asked her where money came from, and she admitted that the banks created money. So we asked, do you think it would be a good idea if that power was taken away from the banks? She wasn't very keen in going down that route. So we just asked if she had heard of the Bradbury pound, and that produced rather a long pause, whereupon it was clear that she wasn't aware of the Bradbury pound. And so we suggested that this organisation might like to look into the Bradbury pound and a complete restart to the economy using M0, where we're removing the debt burden, which only benefits the banks. So a lot of questions to be asked about this organisation. As always, it's important to have a look at the people. And I was intrigued that the top man there, Dominic, comes from McKinsey. He's global, one of the global managers for McKinsey. So this is one of the key management consultancies into every single government organisation, advising, etc. But we've also got people from the European Union, despite the fact that this has all come about as a result of Brexit. We've got people with banking interests. We've got our old friend Lord Bob Kerslake down there, the common purpose guru, but he's now working for the Peabody Trust. We've got banking interests, we've got social entrepreneurs, we've got everything to do with big society. On it goes, and it took us a while to see Justin Welby, who's down at the bottom, so presumably he's thrown in as the token churchy man to make sure that it's all okay. But interestingly, Mike, you mentioned AI, and I was intrigued with this gentleman here, so we'll bring him up on screen in a bit more detail. Mustafa
Suleyman.
Yeah, thank you. And, well, he's very big in AI, co-founder and head of applied AI at DeepMind, where he's responsible for integrating the company's technology across a wide range of Google products. So we've got Google right in the middle here. But it caught my eye that actually he'd been involved with DeepMind Health, which builds clinician-led technology in the NHS. and all of this gets taken over by Google. So we've just got fascinating stuff happening, but once again we can see these massive global corporations helping to form the policy. And at this point, I think we better put up this headline from the Times: NHS set to be offered a fair share of data profits. I found it extraordinary coincidence that this had come out at the same time, where we're saying that because private companies are making so much money out of your data, which the NHS holds, the NHS should get a share of the loot.
I see. I thought that data was to be protected, but apparently not. It's going to be sold now, and then we're going to use that to pay for the NHS.
Yeah, no, you don't want to protect it, Mike, because you make huge amounts of money out of it. But this was part of the text. Companies using NHS patient records to build the next generation of healthcare tools will have to demonstrate that any commercial gains they make are shared fairly with the NHS.
Fairness again.
Yeah,
yes.
Fair. The Department for Health has drawn up a code of conduct for technology firms that use the NHS's unique data to train their algorithms. Now we're really getting into it, because we can see those insurance companies want to get in amongst the data to make sure they can put your premiums up, because they know that you're likely to die in the same way that your grandparents or older relatives did. This is pretty cynical stuff, and it's not coming through Westminster. It's all being pushed in via these think tanks. So if you go and do some research for yourself on that organisation, IPPR, have a look at the people around Mr. Welby. Do they really have the best interests of the poor at heart? I would suggest not. They are very overwhelmingly globalist, looking for the next profit. But do your own research and see what you think. We'll leave it there. How do we describe the situation at the moment, Mike?
Well, I was just going to say I'm off now to buy a new batch of baby wipes, because clearly it's more important than ever to have some in my pocket at all times.
Yeah. We'll just end on the note that we've been doing UK column news for a very long time now. It's becoming increasingly difficult to report what we're reading and seeing, because so much of it is either complete madness or it's a pack of lies. But we'll end on that note. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.